Okay, scholars, it's another installment of Jack Herod's Introduction to Sociology. Today we're going to be talking about crime and deviant behavior, our chapter 7. The actual title of chapter 7 is Crime and Social Control. So we're going to talk about different types of crimes, how sociologists think we should be measuring crime. We'll talk about recent crime trends. We'll look at how the different sociological perspectives look at crime. So there's a lot to be covered in this chapter, and I know I've said it a couple of times before, but this is one of my favorite chapters. My area of specialization when I went to LSU to work on my PhD was crime and deviant behavior. I've spent a lot of time studying this and working on these issues. I'm certainly somewhat knowledgeable, but I'm always learning. And so we will talk a little bit more about all of this stuff as we go through the chapter. So we're going to start out with a discussion about what we mean by the term deviance. So we'll talk about what deviance is, how society tries to control the behavior of its citizens. We'll talk a little bit about how laws get formed and things of that nature. So it's a really good chapter. It's a long chapter, a lot of information there, and I think it's important information. So let's start out with our discussion of deviance. We'll start out with a definition of deviance. Deviance is behavior that violates the standards of conduct or expectations of a group or society. So when we were talking about socialization, we talked about and culture, we talked about norms, and we talked about how norms regulate our behavior, and there are sanctions associated with norms and things of that nature. And so today what we're going to focus specifically on is how society responds when people violate some of the rules that we have agreed should govern our behavior. Okay. So deviance involves violations of group norms. Those norms can be really, really important to the functioning of society, or they can be more rules just for how we interact with each other on a daily basis. You know, we talked about informal norms and formal norms. We talked about folkways and mores, and those are examples of different types of norms. And so when somebody violates a rule in society, there are a number of things that can happen. One, nobody observes the rule breaking behavior or calls attention to it, and so therefore it's just kind of ignored. Number two, there can be a societal reaction. Someone says, hey, look, this person broke the rules, and society can either respond to that through formal, sanctions, or society again can ignore it. There have been a few sociologists who focused on the area of juvenile delinquency who have suggested that we should leave children and adolescents alone as much as possible. Now, that doesn't mean that we ignore all of their misbehavior. Obviously, if teenagers are doing things that are dangerous to themselves or to other people, then that does call for a societal response. But most of the infractions that teenagers engage in are only against the law because they are what we call status offenses. It's only because the teenager is a minor that the activity is illegal. So drinking underage, truancy, violating curfews, those kinds of things are only illegal for teenagers because they are indeed teenagers. Okay, so if we ignored a lot of that rule violating behavior, according to these sociologists, then that behavior the individual would grow out of that behavior, mature out of it. There is an aging curve of crime, and what we see is that the peak age for criminal activity is about 16 years of age, but as it peaks at about 16, and then it just kind of levels out and it falls off as young people reach their 20s, and then it falls off even further as they get to their mid 20s and late 20s. So most individuals do violate some of society's rules. I certainly did when I was a teenager. I suspect that most of you have. Surveys that we do, that we call self-report surveys, show that most of us do engage in behaviors that society disapproves of at some time in our lives, but in many cases it goes unnoticed, it goes unpunished. We're not labeled juvenile delinquents, and we're able to mature out of those law-violating behaviors. Even if we're just talking about somebody, minor in possession and those kinds of things, generally when people engage in those activities, if there's no societal response, the individual will grow up and mature out of that behavior. A lot of criminal behavior is committed by a very small segment of our society, the career criminals, and they certainly are a group to be concerned about. But most of us who run afoul of the law in our teens, and it doesn't come to the attention of police officers and law enforcement people, then we do tend to mature out of that as we age and mature and hopefully get a little wiser about society's rules and which ones we should challenge and which ones we should not challenge. Okay, so this concept of deviance is a pretty comprehensive concept. It involves all rule violating behavior, all the way from speeding, parking in the wrong place, parking in a handicapped spot, all the way up to serial killings, mass murders, and things of that nature. So anything that violates society's norms would fall into the category of deviance, but not all deviance is necessarily criminal, right? There are a lot of things that we do that goes against society's expectations that doesn't necessarily violate any laws. Okay, so deviance is not always a negative thing. Sometimes we can actually see some functions of deviance. For example, if there's a law that doesn't make a lot of sense and people start breaking that law kind of routinely, then that can encourage people to go back and look at those laws and see if they really should be on the books, and maybe we need to update our laws to more accurately reflect the current times. Okay, there are other reasons why deviance might be beneficial to society. If a law is negatively impacting one group over another, for example, if we're not allowing women to vote prior to 1920, then women who say, you know what, we're not going to put up with this, we are going to get the right to vote, and they begin protesting, and certainly protests are not unlawful, but they are often considered to be deviant. And so when people stop going to work and start showing up at rallies and protests and things of that nature, society might frown at that a little bit, and that might be considered deviant behavior. But those women protesting and the people who are in minority groups or who are empathetic towards minority groups who protest, and for example, the Black Lives Matter protest against police brutality, those individuals may be looked at as deviants by some of society, but they also can be an important agent of change, right? So we'll talk about how deviance can serve some functions at times. We can say, hey, you know what, this law doesn't make any sense anymore. So many people are breaking it that maybe it's time to change the law. Our rules are somewhat subjective in terms of a lot of our rules are not based on objective reality. For example, in the 1930s, we made it illegal to possess or consume marijuana in this country, even though we had not done much research on the effects of marijuana. And when you compare the objective harms of marijuana to tobacco and alcohol, it's very clear that those other substances are much more harmful. Now, that doesn't mean that marijuana is not harmful. There are some harms that we're aware of, but to be quite honest with you, we haven't done as much research into the harmful effects of marijuana as we should have, simply because it has been categorized as a Schedule I narcotic for many years now. And so that deems that it's really not an acceptable substance for research. So, we've got this conflicted past with alcohol and marijuana and the way that we look at those two substances. A lot of it may have to do with the groups who are using them. Alcohol is certainly used by people from all social strata, all the way from the upper class down to the lower class. Marijuana use is more favored, I think, or at least early on in its spread through the United States, was being found among minority members, jazz musicians, Mexican immigrants to this country. And so because those groups are not favored groups and not the dominant group in society, that behavior was largely condemned, while people were still drinking alcohol. Even during Prohibition, wealthier people would go to speakeasies, and probably middle class and working class people would go to speakeasies as well. But it was a lot easier for wealthy people to be able to get alcohol and to consume it during Prohibition. So there is some likelihood that the people who are using certain substances influences how society responds to the use of those substances. For example, we can look at the differences in sentencing for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. And in most states in the country, being in possession of crack cocaine is a more serious sentence than being in possession of powder cocaine. And that definitely, I think, is related to the fact that the people who typically use powder cocaine are wealthier and whiter than people who have traditionally been using crack cocaine. Predominantly. Okay, so even the use, who's using a substance can determine how society looks at that substance and whether we have harsh or more lenient penalties against the use of those substances. Think about how many people are abusing opioids. We're in the midst of an opioid crisis. These are medications that are prescribed by physicians for pain. They are derivatives of opium and morphine. And so they're very powerful pain relievers, but they have a high potential for abuse. And we know that a lot of people will become addicted to those medications and then start to use illegitimate means to obtain them. Okay, or in some cases they're not using illegitimate means to obtain them, but physicians are engaging in overprescribing these medications, and it's far too easy for people to become addicted and to continue the use of them. So we're starting to see a lot of prosecutions of physicians who have really violated their oath to try to help us and protect us and to do no harm. By overprescribing prescription medications, which are certainly very, very harmful. I suspect that more harm has been, done by prescription medications than most of the illegal drugs that are on the market out there. But that's not to say that those drugs are not dangerous. I think the harms associated with marijuana use, including some potential chromosomal damage, the potential to create or to spark psychotic episodes in people who have underlying mental illness that hasn't yet been diagnosed. Chronic use of marijuana has been associated with kind of serving as a catalyst to cause people who have an underlying mental illness to experience an episode. There are other dangers that we may not be aware of. Of course, lung damage. Someone who's ingesting toxins into their lungs is probably going to suffer some lung damage and things of that nature. Today, we're seeing that there's even a discussion about whether people might be more susceptible to COVID-19 as a result of chronic marijuana use. So these are all things to keep in mind, and there may be harms associated with marijuana use that we have not yet discovered, simply because we can't really do a lot of research into that topic. Even when we do research in it, we're using federally grown marijuana for those research projects, and the feds don't know a whole lot about growing marijuana. There was a time when people thought that the federal government grew the best marijuana in the country in terms of potency, but more recent testing has shown that much of the marijuana that's grown by the federal government for the purpose of research is of very poor quality, and therefore that undermines the quality of the research that's being done. So that's a whole nother discussion, and we'll talk about that probably at another time during the semester. But so we're talking about rule violating behavior and how society perceives it and how society reacts to it. These are complex issues. Social class and race and gender and all of these kinds of variables play into these discussions, but we're going to talk about that as we get into our chapters. Now, sometimes when people violate society's rules, they are labeled and they suffer from a stigma. Okay, and stigma is defined as the labels that society uses to devalue members of certain social groups. So someone who has a conviction for marijuana use or DWI, DUI, has a stigma associated with their name. They've been convicted of a crime once they've gone to court and there's been a guilty verdict returned. And so an ex-con carries a stigma with them. And every time they have to fill out a job application and they have to answer that question, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And they have to say yes. That makes it less likely that they're going to get the job. Once the employer does the background check and sees that this person has convictions in their history, that can make it very, very difficult to get a job. And people who need to earn a living and yet can't get a job, what are they left to do? If they can't find a job in the legitimate opportunity structure in society, the legitimate economy, then oftentimes they will gravitate to the illegitimate opportunity structure in society, such as being involved in drug sales and prostitution and theft and various other criminal activities. So stigmatization can affect not only those who commit crimes, but they can also affect people who suffer from mental illnesses. I think the stigma associated with suffering from things like depression and even maybe bipolar disorder is lessening a little bit, but it's still there's still a stigma associated with that. Having dealt with some depression and mood issues myself, I can tell you that there is a tendency to not want to divulge that information because that people tend to look down on people who have had mental health issues. And so there's a lot of different types of stigma that can come with different types of deviant behaviors, and in some cases, some deviant behaviors are not stigmatizing as much as others, and some are not stigmatizing almost not at all. Okay. So some types of deviance will result in suffering from a stigma, but let's say that someone is arrested for protesting, unlawful protesting. That may actually be, rather than stigmatizing, it may actually gain them status. For example, someone in Hollywood who, is a celebrity who decides to go and protest something that they feel very strongly about, and they're arrested, they may feel that that is a badge of honor to have been arrested for that behavior. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about the relationship between deviance and technology. We know that today the widespread use of the internet and social media apps and all kinds of things, the internet has opened up new avenues for deviant behavior. We get cyberbullying. We get that prince in Nigeria who wants to help us to help him get his fortune out of Nigeria, and all we have to do is give them our bank account information and they're going to wire us millions of dollars, and they don't want all of it when they get get it transferred to us. They don't want it all back. Of course, we know that that's a scam. There are tons of internet scams out there trying to bilk honest people out of their earnings and their savings. And so technology has really opened up a lot of new avenues for criminal behavior, wire fraud, transfers to from legitimate accounts to illegitimate accounts, hacking into data systems, and all of those kinds of things. Those are types of crimes that didn't exist 40 years ago, 50 years ago, because people didn't have that ability to use technology in that way. So, when we started getting online in large numbers and for long periods of time, we know that people started treating each other pretty badly. The difference between bullying when I was a kid growing up and bullying today is that I think the actual bullying was probably worse in my childhood, but the big difference is that it can be 24 hours a day now. So bullying may still occur, and unfortunately, when kids go home because of social media, it never stops. And in that way, bullying today is much worse than bullying was when I was a teenager. But uh, you know, my daughter once said that she was being bullied in school, and I tried to get her to describe some of the bullying behaviors, and she talked about kids saying things that were unkind and just teasing her and things of that nature. And I said, well, I understand that that's hurtful and it's harmful, but bullying when I was a teenager involved people getting pushed up against the wall and having their lunch money taken away from them under threat of violence. And while that kind of thing may be happening a little less frequently today, the fact is bullying can be a 24-hour-a-day thing that some of these kids couldn't escape. And when I was a kid, when you went home, once you got home, you were at least free from the bullying of your classmates. But today that's no longer the case. So we can talk about I think the harmful effects of all of that is the same today as it was when I was a kid. Kids grow up feeling fearful, feeling that they're not safe, feeling that they have to give up their lunch money in order to survive in school, to kowtow to those who are maybe the popular kids or whatever clique it is that's engaging in the bullying. I'm not sure that we can totally eradicate that, but I do think that we've developed zero tolerance policies, which do help a little bit in allowing school officials to try to reduce the bullying as much as possible. But it didn't take us long for the first ugly comments. Once the internet went live and people got on there, it didn't take long for us to start treating each other in pretty heinous ways, simply because we're not geographically necessarily close to each other, although we might be. But to say things, that distance, that detachment that you have from the other person simply because you're not in the same place, to call people, horrible names and to mistreat each other, has become a real serious issue. Uh, so we could also talk about how much we get hit by advertising on the internet, and that's becoming viewed as deviant. Right now, we've got the political campaigns going on, and so there are lots and lots of ads out there for different candidates. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sick of seeing the political ads and particularly the negative ads that aren't based in reality. If a candidate wants to point out that a rival has a different viewpoint on things, I think that's certainly appropriate and acceptable. But when they are distorting the truth and misquoting things and spreading conspiracies, then it becomes problematic, because you get so much of that stuff out there that it gets hard to figure out what the truth is sometimes. Okay. There have been some calls to try to establish some rules for online behavior. Mark Zuckerberg and others who have various social media platforms have been called on to try to regulate the behavior of the people who are using their services. And so far, they have seemed to have resisted most of those calls. But I think eventually, if these companies do not begin to regulate their users' behaviors, then it is likely that there will be some legislation passed, at least at the state levels and perhaps even at the federal level, to try to regulate how they deal with things, like calls for violence against different groups, the spreading of mistruths, I guess, is a polite way of saying lying. But I think that we still have some issues that we need to deal with in regards to technology and how information is shared with each other. Certainly, technology has tremendous capacity to allow us to communicate. The fact that I can talk to you guys via these videos is an example of how the media and social media and the technology can all be used in I hope a positive way, but it can also be used in some very negative ways, as we know. We know that in some cases teens have been bullied to the point of suicide, to the point of mass homicide. So kids, I think today are a little kinder to each other than my generation was, or at least I hope they are. My daughter is certainly a very soft-hearted, kind person, and a lot of her friends and the kids that she's hung out with have been very much the same way. So I have a lot of optimism, for our young people in society today. That's the thing that really does give me optimism about the future, is that I think future generations will be less prejudiced, less mean to each other. A little kindness can go a long ways, and so I certainly would advocate kindness whenever you can respond to something in a kind way. It's a better alternative than reacting in an angry, hostile way. Okay, although there are times when hostility and anger are not misplaced. When we look at protesters who are protesting the treatment of minorities by police officers who are using excessive force, and some of them are, let's face it, guys, many police officers out there are good, fine people who are doing their best to protect and serve, but unfortunately, and I don't buy the few bad apples argument anymore. It is far too widespread for us to say that there are a few bad apples. Now, I'm not calling for disbanding and disfunding police departments. I think law enforcement has been an important part of our society for a long time, and I think for any society to thrive and survive, they have to have some way of maintaining the control over bad behavior, some way to punish bad behavior. But when people in positions of authority abuse that authority, they are violating the social contract, and it's unfair to expect people, the citizenry, to tolerate that for an indefinite period of time. So if people in power abuse that power, eventually there will be a reaction, and there should be. How can we respect people who don't take up for themselves when they're being treated badly? Okay. So we can get into that whole discussion about, the use of force. We can look at other countries and how their officers, their law enforcement officers, deal with the public. When we think about the UK, most police officers in the UK are not allowed to carry a firearm. And the very few that are highly trained in the proper use of those lethal weapons. And so, other countries are able to police their citizenry without assault rifles and, combat a more militaristic approach. So maybe in this time of searching for answers, that might be an approach that we want to look at, is more community policing, less of a military presence and approach from law enforcement officers. But those are questions that I think we should at least think about and approach. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about social control. And social control is defined as the techniques and strategies for preventing deviant behavior in any society. So, in the United States, we tend to, look at law enforcement, our uh, sheriff's deputies, our local police officers, state law enforcement agencies, and then, of course, we've got federal law enforcement as well. We have a number of entities that are out there to help formally engage in social control. Uh, but social control is something that occurs at all levels. And it not only includes the formal reactions with the criminal justice systems, but it also includes things like gossiping about a neighbor who is parking his car on his lawn instead of in the driveway where he's supposed to, and homeowners associations getting involved in the disputes and all of those kinds of things. From very minor things, violations of the rules, all the way up to the violations of laws that result in formal reactions. Okay. Um, Even bureaucratic organizations have a lot of policies and procedures, and they often have a big, thick handbook to tell you how you're supposed to behave in that organization and what can happen to you if you violate those rules. So, social control exists at all levels of society, from parents trying to discipline their children to juvenile justice authorities adjudicating juvenile a delinquent for violating society's rules and putting them in juvenile hall. Those kinds of situations, to all the way up to the death penalty. Most people respect and accept the basic norms of society. We all understand that you can't go around taking people's property from them, or using violence to get your way in disputes and things of that nature. So most of us respect and accept the norms of society, but there is a small percentage of our society that is in opposition to society's rules. Sanctions, of course, we know from Chapter 3 refers to both the penalties and the rewards that are associated with either breaking rules or playing by the rules in an exceptional way. And sometimes people get competing messages. Let's think about the mask wearing situation right now with COVID-19. Should you wear a mask? Should you not wear a mask? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that mask wearing behavior is not just to protect the individual who's wearing the mask, but it's to protect the people around them. It's if I am asymptomatic, or perhaps I've got a little bit of a sniffle, but I think I'm okay, and I go out around people and I don't wear a mask, I might be spreading COVID-19 or some other infection to other people. And that's kind of, I would see that as I'm being a little bit irresponsible there. Yes, I have a right to freedom and to make my own decisions, but when we have a public health crisis, such as the one that we're dealing with right now, it's really more responsible from me to wear a mask, try to let other people know that, hey, mask wearing behavior is a positive thing. We should do this. We all need to pull together here and look out not just for my health, but for your health. When I wear a mask, it's not, certainly it's for me, but it's even more, it's for you guys, because now I'm not spreading those germs all around that could make you ill if I'm sick and I don't know it. Because we know that a lot of people have fairly minor symptoms, but they can transmit the virus. And there are even concerns that people who may be infected with the virus but are not displaying any symptoms at all, there's still some discussion about whether or not those individuals could spread the virus to other people. I think the evidence is inconclusive at this point, but it's a good idea to be, err on the side of caution here, and let's all just wear our masks. But some people are turning it into a political protest. I have my rights. You can't tell me I have to wear a mask. Well, society is saying, yes, we can tell you that you have to wear a mask during this crisis. And if you don't, you may end up running afoul of various jurisdictions. And not just, the possibility that people could be fined for these things, but there's the possibility that conflicts break out, fights break out, and things of that nature. And we need to see that people are getting in line with this thing, and we're trying to look out for each other. It's a matter of mutual respect, I think. At least that's how I would couch the argument. Um, you know, just because you have a right to do something doesn't mean that you should do something. Okay. So anyway, we'll talk about that more. Uh, Now, let's think about the different sociological perspectives. We've got the functionalists. They're looking at deviant behavior, and they're looking at norms and values, and they're saying that we all need to agree on the rules. That ensures that fewer people are going to break the rules. And functionalists would say that there are some functions that come when people break the rules. We tend to think of that as being disruptive in society, and it can be, particularly if it becomes widespread. Remember, Durkheim talked about anomie, and anomie is when society loses the ability to control the behavior of its citizens, and that certainly is a very serious thing. But minor rule breaking or isolated rule breaking behavior can actually serve some functions according to the functionalist approach. For example, as I said earlier, if people are breaking a rule pretty often, then that may tell you that it's time to revise the rules, and so that can be a positive. If people are breaking the rules, then that may tell you that there's something wrong in society that needs to be addressed. Also, when people break the rules, it can create a situation where people come together. Think about what happened in this country after 9/11. We had those terrorist attacks, the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, the plane that crashed I think in Pennsylvania that was headed for Capitol Hill. This country came together in a way that I have not seen it come together very many times in my lifetime as a result of being attacked by outsiders. We'd probably have to go back to like Pearl Harbor as the last time that this country was really united in the way that we saw in the aftermath of 9/11. So, when people break the rules, we can all say, oh, look, this person broke the rules. Look at what they're doing. It's so horrible. And that kind of sets us apart. It creates a us and them kind of dichotomy where we say that, this person who committed this really heinous act is different from the rest of us, and therefore they should be punished harshly. And that helps to reaffirm society's norms. When we punish people for breaking the rules, it sends a message to everyone else that, hey, that's a rule you really don't want to break because the punishment is pretty stiff and it's pretty heinous. So, maybe as heinous as, not quite as heinous as the act, because at least there's a due process, and there's protections for even prisoners who do really horrible things. They do have some protections, some legal protections, and things of that nature that their victims may not have had. Right. Conflict theorists have a little different approach to deviant behavior. They think that the rule makers typically are going to pass legislation that favors their behaviors and their lifestyles over the lifestyles and behaviors of other groups who are not in power. And so for conflict theorists, many laws may more reflect the views of the ruling class than middle class and working class and lower class people. So they feel like conflict theorists tend to feel that laws are done in a way that kind of benefits the upper classes at the expense of the lower classes. And the example I gave of powder versus crack cocaine is a perfect example of that. They would also point to the fact that, minorities tend to receive longer sentences than the dominant group. They would also point to the disparity between white collar crime and street crime and the punishments that go with those different categories of criminal behavior, even though white collar crime may involve much more money and much more harm to the country. Street crimes are viewed in a more fearful way. And so conflict theorists would say that, if we can focus people's attention on street crimes, they tend to not pay as much attention to the crimes that middle class and upper class people are committing. And certainly there are a number of crimes that they commit that are very damaging to this country and to the citizens of the country. And so the conflict theorists are going to, focus on how we make laws, whether those laws reflect the views of all Americans or just a segment of Americans, and which groups are able to get their views codified into law and which are not. They would focus on the unequal enforcement of those rules. They would point out that, if a 12-year-old white middle class kid gets caught sitting in a car that doesn't belong to them, that the response of the police might be different than if that's a 12-year-old African American child who's sitting in a car that doesn't belong to them. The response of the police might be a little different in those two circumstances. And we know that, through a lot of research, that there are disparities in the way that police officers use their judgment as to whether, hey, can I just take this kid home to his parents and kind of give him a lecture and let it go at that? Or do I need to take this person into custody, turn them over to juvenile justice authorities, and allow the juvenile justice system to deal with this? Sometimes those decisions are influenced by social standing, social class, race, and things of that nature. And that means that more kids who are children of color might end up coming to the attention of juvenile justice authorities than the dominant group. Okay. So, and then even when district attorneys start talking about, well, do I need to prosecute this case or drop the charges? We know that being part of an influential family, being wealthier, definitely has some advantages when it comes to the way that district attorneys and judges and juries make decisions regarding different allegations of wrongdoing. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about conformity and obedience. And conformity has to do with going along with people who don't really have any authority over you. And obedience, of course, refers to doing something that someone who has a position of power tells you to do. And so there has been some research into conformity and obedience, and what we found, at least what Milgram found, was that a large percentage of our population are willing to do something someone else tells us, even if they don't really have any legitimate authority over us. And so that's a serious concern. We need to delve into that a little bit. So in the Milgram experiment, here's what happened. The experimenter would instruct people to ask what they thought were research subjects different questions, and if they gave incorrect answers, they were supposed to administer an electrical shock to the subject on the other side of the wall. But the subjects on the other side of the wall weren't actually subjects. They were Confederates who were working with the researcher in the project. The real subject was the person who was being instructed to ask the questions and push the button to administer the shock. And so there was a dial there, and they would administer a shock. They weren't actually shocking anybody, but they thought they were. And so they would administer the shock, and they were instructed to turn the knob one click to the right to increase the voltage for the next shock, for the next misanswered question. Okay, so they would ask these questions, and the person on the other side would give a correct answer, no shock. They'd give an incorrect answer, shock, turn the knob. And at one point, there was a place on the knob where there was a red band, which kind of indicates, hey, this is a potentially dangerous level of shock. And so, the researcher found that some people were willing to administer what they believed to be a potentially lethal electrical shock to another human being simply because somebody in a lab coat was saying, please continue the experiment. You know, uh, and so that's a bit of a concern. When the Nazis were saying we were just following orders in those Nuremberg trials, some of them may have been, truthful in that. They knew what would happen to them if they disobeyed orders, if they refused to kill someone or put them on a train to a concentration camp. They knew that they would be killed or sent to a concentration camp themselves, or sent to the Russian front where German soldiers were dying at a very high rate. They knew that nothing pleasant was going to happen to them if they refused an order from a superior. So that put a lot of pressure on them to do things that might have violated their own personal norms and values. But now, when we think about these people in this research who, just because somebody in a lab coat said, please continue the experiment, they went through with it and administered what they thought was a lethal shock. I think about 2/3 of the respondents, about 67%, 60%. Of the subjects actually, were conforming or obedient. They were willing to administer a potentially lethal shock to another human being just in the name of science. Okay. So 2/3 of the participants fell into the category of obedient subjects in the Milgram study. People in the modern industrial world are used to being told what to do and doing those things for the most part. Okay. Studies have shown that people are more willing to obey if they believe that the victim deserves the punishment. So if they think that the person on the other side of the thing is less intelligent or is somehow a bad person or deserves the punishment, then they're even more willing to administer that punishment than the 2/3 that we saw in the Milgram study. And of course, recent replications of this research has confirmed that, unfortunately, a very large percentage of our population is obedient, even when they think that behavior violates their own personal code of behavior. So, social control can be very effective, just through this obedience. We've talked a little bit about informal and formal social control before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all of that. Let's talk a little bit about laws. We know that some of our norms are so viewed as so important to the smooth functioning of society that we codify those into law. And so when somebody breaks rules regarding those kinds of behaviors, now they become a statistic. They are arrested, and that rule violating behavior becomes a part of our crime data. And so we're going to talk about crime data here in a few minutes. But we can look at the example of marijuana use, as I talked about earlier. We've got a lot of conflict. We've got different rules for different states. We've got, of course, the federal laws, which still prohibit the use of marijuana. And so it can be very confusing how we should respond to all of those kinds of issues. Control theory suggests that it's not, the question we shouldn't be asking is, why did this person commit a crime? But rather, the question we should be asking is, why didn't everyone commit crimes? Okay. So control theory is kind of turning the argument on its end, and it's saying, well, wait a minute. What is it that keeps people from breaking society's rules? Okay, and social control theorists said that there are what they call bonds to the moral order. Okay, well, gosh, that's an interesting term, bonds to the moral order. What does that mean? Well, okay, so they think that there are at least 4 different bonds to the moral order. The first one that we could talk about would be involvement. okay? And every juvenile delinquency prevention program I've ever seen tries to focus on involvement. If you can get kids involved in legitimate activities that are good for them and healthy for them, then that's a minute that every minute they spent doing that is a minute that they're not out there engaging in shoplifting, smoking marijuana, doing all these things that we think might be harmful for kids. So involvement is a real big part of juvenile delinquency prevention programs, but it's not the only bond to the moral order. There are other bonds to the moral order, such as attachment. And attachment refers to the bonds that we develop to our family members. And so if our family members, our mom and dad and our siblings are telling us these behaviors are good and okay, and these behaviors are bad and not okay, then a lot of times that will prevent us from committing crimes because we don't want to disappoint our parents, we don't want to disappoint our siblings and other family members. So that attachment is important. So we've got involvement, attachment. Another component of these bonds to the moral order is what is called commitment. So, I remember every time I think about commitment, I think about a movie that I watched some years ago. It's an older movie, Little Miss Sunshine. And if you've seen that movie, you'll know what I'm talking about pretty quickly. If you haven't seen it, I can recommend it. It's a comedy. It's pretty funny, and there's some interesting things that happen in this movie. If you remember, those of you that have seen it, you remember that there's this young man in the family who wants to become a fighter pilot, and he has taken a vow of silence until he gets into the military and is able to move towards his goal of becoming a fighter pilot. And so he's been he's been working out and he's studying hard on all of his classes, and he wants to score really high so that he can get into the military and perhaps become a fighter pilot. And he's just so committed to this, and he would not think of putting drugs into his body or breaking some of society's rules that would get him in trouble with the law. He is very committed to that goal. So young people who think, well, someday I want to be an attorney, or someday I want to, be the CEO of a large corporation, they may think about, well, gosh, if I break these rules, if I do these things, then that's going to negatively impact my ability to do, whatever it is I want to do. So that commitment can keep people from breaking society's rules simply because they don't want to lose out on some of the dreams that they have, some of the commitments they've made to try to achieve some of their goals. Okay, so we've got attachment, involvement, commitment, and then the fourth bond to the moral order that control theorists talk about is belief. Okay, in other words, if you believe that the rules that govern your behavior make sense and they should be the rules that govern our behavior, you're a lot less likely to break the rules than if you think, that's such a stupid law. Okay, so think about it this way. You grow up in a family where people tell you that the police are corrupt, that judges and lawyers and public defenders are corrupt, that politicians are corrupt, that the laws are just there to keep you in place while the rich are breaking the laws with impunity. You're likely to grow up not being very respectful of the law. Okay, and it's easier to break rules that you don't respect than it is to break rules that you do respect. Okay, so that's what we mean by belief. So you've got attachment, involvement, commitment, and belief. Those are the four bonds to the moral order. And social control theorists believe that those are the things that keep us from committing deviant behavior, even when nobody's around to watch us. Most of us will still stop at a four-way stop, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and there's not a car in sight. We will come to that stop and we'll come to a full stop and then we'll drive on. Most of us will obey society's rules because of all these bonds to the moral order, even when there's no one around to enforce those rules. Okay? All right. So let's talk about a little more about the sociological perspectives. At one time we tended to blame deviant behavior on demon possession or bad blood or genetics, or there were a whole lot of biological explanations, and in some cases some supernatural. Oh, the devil made me do it, or I was taken over by these evil spirits. Today, there are still a few people in society who believe that demon possession causes bad behavior, but most of us now acknowledge that, it probably has something to do with the way that someone socialized and their experiences as they're growing up, that it really isn't about demon possession or bad blood or even genetics. There may be a few behaviors that are biologically related. For example, we know that males have higher levels of testosterone, and having higher levels of testosterone can be linked to aggressive behavior or violence. And so males tend to be arrested for violent behavior more often than females. But that's just a tendency. That's not an absolute. Not all males are violent and not all females are nonviolent. There's plenty of people crossing the boundaries in both categories there. So it's really, not acceptable to say, well, this person did this because he's a man. Well, there's other reasons. There are other underlying reasons why that person broke the rules. Okay. So, we've really kind of excluded all of those biological explanations. We had XYY chromosome theories where we said, well, males are more aggressive than females, and biologically, genetically, males and females are pretty similar to each other, except for females have that XX sex chromosome and males have an XY sex chromosome, and so it must be that Y chromosome that's causing males to be more aggressive and violent than females. So it was kind of a logical assumption then that someone who had two Y chromosomes might be even more violent. And so there are people who have an extra sex chromosome, they have an XYY makeup. And so the thought was, well, gosh, those guys must be really violent because they have two Y chromosomes. So you've got a genetic abnormality that results in an extra Y chromosome on that sex chromosome. Those people must be really violent. And unfortunately, research has shown, or maybe fortunately, if you're an XYY individual, those research has shown that those explanations hold no water. The majority of people who do have the XYY chromosome makeup are not in prison and are not guilty of any crimes or any more crimes than anybody else. And the vast majority of people in prison for criminal activities, particularly violent activities, do not have any genetic abnormalities. So, that theory really doesn't work. We had Cesare Lombroso, an Italian scientist who went into prisons and he measured people's heads, and he looked at their physical features, and he identified what he called the born criminal type. They had a large protruding lower jaw, unusually large ears, a large sloping forehead. He was kind of describing a throwback to an earlier time in human evolution, where males looked more primitive and more aggressive. But we've again found that he was just looking at people who had been convicted of crimes. The reality is that at some point or another, almost all of us commit crimes, so it's not a biological thing. But it does seem to be a socialization issue, and it does seem to be a maturing out of criminal behavior, and whether or not society reacts to some of our misbehavior. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the functionalist approach a little bit more. Durkheim said, first of all, that, hey, I don't believe that deviant behavior is necessarily pathological. That's an interesting concept. He said that, if we're going to say that societies that have crime are ill, then, when we're comparing an ill person to a healthy person, the reason we know that somebody is ill is because we've got a person who's free of illness and free of disease that we can compare them to. Okay, so let's think about which societies have had no deviant behavior or criminal behavior. Okay, I'll give you some more time to think. Hmm, I can't think of any either. I suspect that all societies have had people who would break the rules. And if that's true, then rule breaking behavior can't be seen as a pathology. It can't be seen as a sign of illness. Um, if crime is present in all societies, then we don't have a healthy society that's free of crime that we can say, hey, this is what society should look like if it's free of crime, and therefore these other societies are ill and pathological because they have crime rates. Since there is no society that is free of criminal behavior, then that means that deviant behavior is probably a normal feature of society. But Durkheim did express concern about widespread rule breaking behavior, anomie, as he talked about it, right? So we talked about that already a little bit. So, this concern is that if crime gets out of control, if people start breaking the rules just in widespread manners, then that would suggest that society is in a period of normlessness. That the society is not effective at controlling the behavior of its citizens, and that's not necessarily an indictment of the behavior of the individuals who are breaking the laws. It might be an indictment on the society for having some of those rules. Okay, so another functionalist who worked on uh, this idea of crime and deviance is Robert K. Merton. Robert K. Merton wanted to develop a theory that would bridge the gap between macro sociological explanations and micro sociological explanations, because macro level approaches to crime will look at crime rates. How, this society, how does this society compare to that society, and things of that nature. They're not trying to figure out why a specific individual committed a crime. They're trying to figure out why this society has higher crime rates than that society. And so their explanations tend to reflect that. Micro sociological approaches like symbolic interactionism are looking at the individual and why did this individual engage in this behavior. And unfortunately, the two never seem to quite come together. The macro sociological approaches and the micro sociological approaches don't seem to come together, but with the exception of Robert K. Merton, who developed his anomie theory of deviance, or there's some other names for it, but his theory of deviance basically said that everybody in society it wants to achieve certain goals. Okay, in American society, we're a capitalist society, and there's a lot of emphasis on being financially successful. And so Merton said that you've got these culturally approved goals in every society. They're not the same for every society. Maybe in India, being financially successful is not quite as valued as it is here in the United States. But in most developed countries today, we know that, particularly those that practice capitalism, that being financially successful is highly, highly valued. But not everyone has the same opportunities, So if we think about Donald Trump, when his father passed away, Donald Trump inherited, and his family members inherited somewhere around $400 million by the most recent estimates that I've seen. Okay, maybe it was more. Um, Donald Trump had a pretty good leg up on a successful life, right? Jack Herod, there's not so much money there, right? My dad is not a wealthy man, and so I had different opportunities than Donald Trump had. And I went to school with people whose families were much worse off than my family. We weren't in great shakes by any stretch of the imagination, but there were lots of families in my hometown who were in worse shape than my family was, and they struggled even more. And so I think we can all agree, we can just look around society and say, not everybody has the same opportunities. Not everybody can afford to go to private school. Not everyone can go to a prestigious prep school. Not everyone can go to an Ivy League college. Even though diversity programs and things of that, scholarships and Pell Grants have made it more possible for people to go to college and to better schools, more prestigious schools, the reality is that we can't all afford those kinds of educations. And if you graduate from Harvard University, but you made C's all the way through your academic career, you still have a degree from Harvard, and so you're still a Harvard graduate, and that gives you some advantages over someone who may be, they may have graduated magna cum laude, but they graduated from East Texas State University, for example, which no longer exists. It's now Texas A&M Commerce. Even though those two people both have degrees, and one even graduated with highest honors, unfortunately, the Harvard degree may carry more weight than the person who got their degree at Texas A&M Commerce. Okay. So, we've got these culturally approved goals of being financially successful, but not everyone has the same access. It wasn't that long ago that women were discouraged from going to college because, ladies, going to college might hurt your reproductive organs, and minorities were discouraged from attending programs around much of the country unless it was a historically black college or university. And so that limited people's options. And so Merton said that when people encounter these obstacles to being financially successful, they will engage in a variety of modes of adaptation. Okay. And so they will respond to that blockage. And he called that blockage anomie. Now, we've heard that term anomie before. Durkheim used it to refer to a period of normlessness in society, but Merton said, well, I like that concept of anomie, but I'm going to use it in a different way than Durkheim did. I'm going to refer to it as the blockage that some people experience when they're trying to become financially successful or to achieve culturally approved goals. And out of that, he said that people would respond in a number of ways. Okay, he gave, I think it was 5 different modes of adaptation that he talked about. He talked about conformity. That's the most common, and it's the non-deviant form of response. So what he's saying is that some people are going to get blocked in their goal to be financially successful, but they're going to figure out a way to, maybe they go to night school, maybe they borrow money to go to school, maybe they get Pell Grants, maybe they get some scholarships, maybe they work 2 jobs and go to college in their spare time and take online classes or whatever they have to do, but they are conforming. They're still playing by society's rules. They're still accepting that, hey, if I want to be financially successful, I've got to get an education, and I'm going to go to college, and yes, that's going to be hard, and I'm going to struggle, but I'm going to get it done. That's the majority of our population. We are conformist in that regard. Okay, so it's the largest mode of adaptation, and it's the only non-deviant mode of adaptation. Okay, according to Merton. The next category that I'll talk about is the category that he called retreatists. Retreatists just kind of give up. They say, you know what, people like me can't be successful, or I can't be successful. I've got all these obstacles in my way. I'm just going to kind of drop out. I'm going to get involved in substance abuse, or I'm going to go live under a bridge and not play the man's game and get in the rat race and all of that. I'm just going to drop out of society. I'm going to retreat from both the goals and the means that people use to achieve those goals. So those are the retreatists. The next category are innovators. Okay, innovation. I still want to be financially successful. I can't do it the traditional way, the culturally approved way. So guess what? I'm going to sell drugs. I'm going to run prostitutes. I'm going to become a professional thief. I'm going to do things that involve violation of the law in order to be financially successful. I'm an innovator. Not all innovators necessarily break the law. Someone who drops out of college and goes and invents a social media app and becomes a billionaire would also be an innovator, but in that case, it's a non-deviant form of innovation. Although I suspect that Mark Cuban's parents were not very happy when he decided to go the route that he wanted to go, but he's had tremendous success and. He may have finished his college degree. I probably shouldn't use Cuban as an example there of an innovator, but he certainly is an innovator in that, he has gone from an upper middle class family to very, very wealthy through the use of developing social media apps and technological advances and things of that nature. Okay. Then you have the group that Merton called ritualists. Okay, this is the person who's really given up on the goal of financial success, but they keep showing up at their job day after day after day, even though they know that that job's not going to lead to financial success. They're just kind of going through the motions, right? And so that's what he meant by the ritualist. And then the last category are the rebels. Okay, the rebellion adaptation. So, to give you an example of somebody who fits into the rebellion category, we can think about David Koresh. You guys, that name may be familiar to you if you've watched any of the shows about the siege, the federal siege at Waco. David Koresh was a young man who became a religious leader of a particular sect down in Waco. And at some point, he and his followers started stockpiling guns and ammunition. And that was kind of alarming to the federal government. They thought, why are these folks down here buying all these guns and stockpiling, ammunition and all of this? So at some point, they decided that they needed to take David Koresh into custody. David Koresh did not give himself up. And come out when the federal government showed up, and the FBI and the ATF and those folks showed up and asked him to come out and surrender. He refused to do so. There was a siege that lasted some weeks, resulting in a firefight and fiery death, and it was a really horrible thing. But I think what we can think about is how David Koresh came to that. David Koresh wanted to be a rock and roll musician. He wanted to be a star. He wanted to make a lot of money and have fortune and fame through his musical talent. But at some point, he seemed to accept that that was probably not going to happen. So rather than continuing on and trying to be successful in that vein, he decided, you know what, I can come up with some new goals and some new ways of achieving it. So I can paint myself as the Messiah. So he claimed to be a religious leader and basically the next coming of the Messiah, the new Messiah. He portrayed himself that way to his followers, and he became the leader of a religious group that they took care of him in terms of his financial needs. They contributed to him through the church offerings and everything. And there were women in the group that were alleged to be having sex with him. So he had money and he had physical affection from these women, and in some cases, perhaps even their daughters, because he was this religious leader. So, I think Merton would look at that and say that Koresh was definitely a fit into the rebellion category because he wasn't able to be financially successful in the traditional way of being financially successful. So he came up with some new goals. He wanted to be admired and loved and adored by this group of people and have all of his needs taken care of. And so he morphed into this religious leader who, was engaging in some pretty heinous behaviors, it sounds like. Probably certainly didn't deserve the end that he got, but he came to the attention of federal authorities because of the stockpiling of the weapons, and I think the federal government badly mishandled that situation. Resulting in the deaths of not only Koresh, but a whole lot of his followers who were in the compound during the siege. So, pretty horrible experience in our history, but I think it demonstrates that mode of adaptation very, very well. Okay, so in Table 7.1, you've got a graphic representation of Merton's theory. So in some cases, they accept the goals and the means. like, for example, conformity. In other situations, they reject both the goals and the means, and that would be perhaps the retreatist. So look at that chart, familiarize yourself with that chart, because I think it's very useful. Okay. Now, we've talked already a little bit about the conflict approach to criminal justice and crime and deviance, and they really feel like we've got a two-tiered criminal justice system, one for very wealthy people and one for people who really lack resources. And so, it's very divisive in that respect, that certain people get treated differently by the criminal justice system than others. Think about white-collar prisons. They are radically different from state-run prisons for street crimes. Generally, if you have to go to prison, a white-collar prison is probably a better option than a state prison for street crimes, street criminals. Not that you want to go to either prison, but if you had to make a choice, certainly white-collar prisons are run somewhat differently than these state-run street crime prisons, the traditional prison system. So there is a difference there. I've been in both, not as inhabitant, but as a visitor. I've taken a number of tours of prisons, both here in the U.S. That are state prisons and some of the federal penitentiaries. And federal penitentiaries are safer, cleaner, a little bit nicer, but still, the threat of violence is there. Okay. Well, let's talk about the interactionist approach to crime and deviance. And they're going to say that essentially, I think I can boil it down pretty quickly, that bad behaviors learn just like any other behaviors learn. So if someone is breaking society's rules, it's because they've grown up in an environment where they were not properly socialized, or they didn't develop normal bonds to their family members and things of that nature. They were not nurtured. It comes back to socialization. They were not properly nurtured during their childhood for the most part. The cultural transmission school is going to focus on the fact that you can learn bad behavior by interacting with other people around you. So you can learn not only the techniques for committing crimes, but you can also learn the motives, drives, and rationalizations for those behaviors. And that comes from Edwin Sutherland. It's a name that you're going to want to know, because he also developed the differential association theory. And so we'll talk a little bit about the differential association theory. I can really demonstrate this very easily, I think, by just asking you, when you were growing up, did your parents ever tell you that there were kids that they didn't want you hanging out with because they were going to be a bad influence? In my case, the kids that my parents didn't want me hanging out with was my cousins, to be quite honest with you. I had a couple of cousins who seemed to get into trouble quite a bit, and you don't have to get in trouble very many times for parents to start saying, I don't want you hanging out with that kid. Now, if you did not hear that from your parents when you were growing up, I don't want you hanging out with little Johnny because he's bad news. You'll learn, you'll get in trouble. If your parents never said that to you, maybe you were the kid that other parents were warning their children not to hang out with. So most of us at one time or another, as we were growing up, were told that there were certain people in our environment that we shouldn't hang out with because we would get in trouble if we did. We would learn things that our parents didn't want us to know. In that way, I would say that all of our parents were differential association theorists, because they knew that if you spend a lot of time hanging out with a group of people and they have rules and they have norms and values and beliefs that differ from, there's the differential, right? That differ from the rules and expectations that the family and society has of you, that could be problematic, right? And so this differential association means that when you associate with people who have different values from your parents, you start to become somewhat more accepting of those values, or you can, right? And so This may help to explain why we engage in a lot of the behaviors. The first time we shoplift, I shoplifted twice in my life, and I was with that same cousin that I was telling you about that my mom didn't want me hanging out with both times. And almost every time I went out and did something with those two cousins, we tended to get into trouble. We did things that were exciting and fun, but were also really frowned upon by our parents, and probably would have been frowned upon by society. And so, certainly we know that people who hang out with the wrong crowd may learn values and beliefs that are contradictory to their parents' values and beliefs and society's values and beliefs. Okay. There's also social disorganization theory under the interactionist perspective. And this basically says that crimes tend to be more prevalent in areas where the community is struggling, that there's some lack of controls there, that there's a lot of things that are going on. There's a breakdown in the communal ties in a particular neighborhood. So, social disorganization theory says that increases in crime and deviance can be attributed to the absence or breakdown of communal relationships or social institutions. So, if you think about inner city areas where crime rates are the highest, a lot of the institutions there are not functioning very well. And there's a lot of disorganization. You've got businesses that are closing up and moving out, leaving vacant buildings. Transients will squat in those buildings and use them for illegal activities such as, prostitution and drug dealing and drug use and things of that nature. So those communities that have the highest crime rates typically are what sociologists would call disorganized communities that really lack cohesion. If you think about growing up in a small town, as I did, if you break a rule in a small town, everybody knows about it. And there's a reaction. Quite often there is a reaction from the community, not just the law enforcement, but everybody in the community knows who you are, and they talk about you, and they whisper behind your back, and they start to avoid you and things of that nature. And so you've got those communal ties, you've got connections with a lot of people in the community, and that prevents you from committing a lot of those transgressions. But in a large city, particularly in certain neighborhoods, there may be a breakdown of those ties. People don't know who you are. People move in, they move out. There's a lot of overcrowding and empty buildings and all of that kind of stuff going on in those communities, and that loosens the binds. The things that bind us and keep us from engaging in misbehavior. Okay. The labeling perspective is another theory that has developed out of symbolic interactionist approach, and it basically says that we all engage in rule violating behavior, and sometimes that rule violating behavior comes to the attention of a teacher or a principal or a juvenile justice authority or a police officer, and if they respond to that may result in a label being affixed to us. And that label then, if we internalize that label, it can lead to further acts of deviant behavior. So if we think about a classroom with 22 kids in it, and you've got Johnny, I hate to pick on, if your name is Johnny, I apologize. We've got Johnny in the classroom, and Johnny's a little mischievous, and he's got maybe a little extra energy, and so he's trying to get up to see the aquarium, and all the kids are gathered around the aquarium looking at the little various fish and everything, and Johnny's he wants to see, he's impatient, and he kind of pushes his way up to that table to see it, and in the process, the aquarium gets knocked into the floor, and the fish are, it breaks, and the fish are, gasping for water there on the floor, and the teacher looks, and there's little Johnny. Then the teacher may decide that little Johnny is a troublemaker, and may send him to the principal's office, and he may get detention, or, in my day, we'd get paddled or whatever. There might be some kind of punishment, and now little Johnny has been identified as a troublemaker, rather than maybe thinking, well, maybe this kid's a little hyperactive. Maybe he's just energetic and he needs outlets that allow him to burn that energy. Some kids are more energetic than others, and they may need that outlet. or maybe they have a learning disability and that's what's causing the disruptive behavior in class. But once a teacher labels a student, we know that they talk to other teachers. Oh, be hopeful you don't get Johnny in your class next year because he's a little monster. He's out of control. And so sometimes when we get labeled, we say, okay, you want to see a troublemaker? I'll show you a troublemaker. And we embrace that role. We become that role, and that can lead us to further acts of misbehavior. Okay. So it's also called the societal reaction approach. It's basically saying that if we can ignore the minor misbehaviors of children, it's really a good idea to, because it's very rare that an individual becomes an adult and just goes out and starts committing adult crimes. Most adult criminals, particularly career criminals, were juvenile delinquents first. They were involved in, they have a long list of juvenile arrests before they become adult criminals. So, if we can approach it from that perspective and try to eliminate as much juvenile delinquency and labeling that goes along with that as possible, we might prevent some teenagers from growing into adult career criminals, according to the theory. Okay. All right. So that's, I do want to mention one other thing. Labeling theory will point out that school teachers and police officers and principals and therapists and people like that have a lot of power to affix a label to a child. And so, the power differential between the authority and the child is pretty stark. There is a significant power differential there. Um, and so they say that the agents, and these, we're talking about teachers and police officers, probation officers, psychiatrists, judges, all of these agents play a significant role in creating a deviant identity by designating certain people and not others as deviant, even though they may be engaging in many of the same behaviors. Okay. And then there's one more aspect of the labeling perspective that I want to mention, and that is the social constructionist perspective. They say that essentially deviance is a product of the culture we live in. And what they're saying is that if you value if your society values financial success so intensely as ours does, that you're going to create people who are willing to cheat. You are going to create a situation where people start to see it as okay to lie about their taxes, to fudge things on applications to try to get advantages over other people. When winning, let's think about the NCAA and think about cheating scandals in college basketball, for example, or college football. Why do coaches or boosters engage in behavior that they shouldn't engage in when they know that there are some pretty strict punishments? SMU got the death penalty, right? So why do people break those rules? Well, if these social constructionists would say, well, the reason they're breaking the rules is because the cost of failure is very high, and the cost of success, or the rewards associated with success, are so high. Nick Saban makes a lot of money every year, millions of dollars a year, for being one of the best coaches in college football. Okay, so there's an incentive for people to try to win a national championship. Because the payoff is millions of dollars, your family being set for life, perhaps even future generations being set for life because of your success. So when you put that much emphasis on winning and success, of course you're going to have people who break the rules and cheat, right? Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? All right, so we're an hour and 27 minutes into this video, so I'm going to stop there. We'll come back. I've talked a little bit about the conflict perspective, but I'll make a few more comments about it, and then the feminist perspective on deviance and that kind of stuff, and then we'll talk about how we actually measure crime and how we can categorize different criminal behaviors into categories and make sense of it. And I will leave you with this question. Think about this. Do you believe that crime rates are rising, staying about the same, or decreasing? Okay, that's an interesting question to ponder. So just think about that, and I'll be back shortly.